Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie with the patient story, and I'm so thrilled to introduce our guest today for our conversation, Matthew, who's going to share his testicular cancer experience. And really, Matthew, the resilience that grew out of this for you completely just shifted your life path, didn't it?
Absolutely. First, thanks for having me, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. And 100%, cancer, I feel like can go two ways. You can either let it define you, or you can grow through it and learn from it and become a better version of yourself. And it was a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of resilience and perseverance. But at the end of the day, I'm actually very blessed and very grateful through the experiences that I learned, and excited to share my story, but more importantly, the lessons that I learned along the way to your audience and community today.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you do a lot of work now where you're helping people try and navigate this thing. It's really crazy times. Before we begin, I'm going to bring up a photo of you from before, before you got diagnosed. Tell us a little bit about Matthew outside of cancer.
Yeah, for sure. So the picture you're probably gonna see is I was a personal trainer, very healthy at the time, working out 6, 7 days a week, eating almost to a T, counting my calories and my macronutrients, which are protein, fats, and carbs, everything. So at that time, personal trainer, wellness director, and basically my life was dedicated towards my health. And for me, actually though. I did have anxiety for sure. I was 20 at that time. I was 24 years old. I had just gotten done with college, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I think it had brought a lot of anxiety to my life. And I had, when I say anxiety, I would have panic attacks, things like that, but I was able to overcome that. And, just before I was, of course, diagnosed with cancer. And, yeah, so really my life predicated around health. And I would say I want to say it was about 5 months before I was diagnosed was when I met my girlfriend Lauren too, which is going to be a vital part of this story. And we can talk more about that as well.
Absolutely, as we were discussing the whole caregiver element, and people who are watching these videos or looking for these, stories are often the caregivers because they're the ones helping to navigate as well. So, thank you for sharing that with us, Matthew. Now, let's get into the nitty gritty. I know, you had quite a long experience with cancer. How did it all begin? How did you know something was wrong and finally get you to that point of, okay, something's going on here?
Yeah. So how I really figured it out was when I just started dating Lauren, which Lauren's my girlfriend. So when I say Lauren, that's basically just so you know, when me and Lauren just started dating, which was around May, June, we started doing all of these summer activities together. We'd go hiking, we'd go kayaking, pretty much everything, just especially as a brand new couple. And all of a sudden I started to notice these minor back pains. And at the time, I was in the best shape of my life. So I was like, okay, I'm lifting a lot, I'm working out a lot. It's got to be the workouts. And as the weeks went by, as the months went by, it got worse and worse and worse. And of course, at 24 years old, you think you're invincible. You're stubborn. You don't want to go to a doctor. Lauren was saying, "Hey, listen, you're just not the same person as you were. Now it's coming on July, and you're not the same person you were in May and June. We should go get you checked out." And I said, "No, I'll go to a chiropractor." So I went to a chiropractor. Basically, they tried to adjust me, but still got worse and worse and worse. So that's kind of how things started to progress. And it got to the point really where it was extremely hard for me to even get up and walk. And I was still, this was probably early August now, still crazy stubborn. And every time I go places, I would just complain about my back, complain about my back. And then one night, I was over at Lauren's house, and I ended up puking up blood that night. And that right away was like, okay, go to the hospital. I got rushed to the emergency room. They did a blood test on me, found out that I had lost 2/3 of the blood circulating in my body, which is equivalent to a gun wound shot. Rushed me in, gave me 6 bags of blood, rushed me into an emergency surgery to figure out what was causing the bleeding. And the next morning is when I woke up, and that was the whole symptom to before cancer.
Wow. So I mean, wow, like you had used a word before, I think we started recording, whirlwind. It started off very quickly. Bam. What tests did you have to undergo before between when you went to the emergency room and then when you actually learned on August 13th the diagnosis of testicular cancer?
Yeah. So really the only test that they did with me was first they had to figure out what was, where was the bleeding caused or how was the bleeding getting caused. So that's when they brought it, did the surgery. They thought it was an ulcer. So they, when they went to that surgery, thought it was an ulcer. And of course they did the blood tests to make sure, like, cause they saw, obviously I wasn't just, puking up blood, but also, you know, the other way as well. So it was just like, they had to figure out what was doing it. So those were the tests. And when I woke up the next day after surgery, I thought I was okay. I mean, like I said, they gave me 6 bags of blood. So it really, energized me. I mean, the time I went to that hospital when I was speaking of blood, I could barely even walk. Like I was so dizzy, so tired, like barely could even see. I'm surprised, like most of them, your hemoglobin, I believe, should be around 15 for a male. And I was like 4.5 to 5. And they're like, literally anything under 5, you shouldn't even be like awake, honestly. And I was right there. So that's basically all the tests they did right there. And then to go a little bit further with it, that next morning when I woke up, I'm thinking it's over. And of course, my doctor walks in, sits down with me, and I mean, as soon as I saw him, he had this blank stare in his eyes, and I knew something was just completely wrong. So he sits down with me, grabs my hand, and he says, "Matt, we found an 11 centimeter tumor in your small intestine. We don't know which cancer it is yet, but we do believe it is cancer, and we have to rush you to the main campus of the Cleveland Clinic immediately." And so I live in Cleveland, and thank goodness, like I have one of the best hospitals in the world, like right at my doorstep. So within a day or two, I mean, they were doing anything they could. They got me to the hospital, and that's where they did a ton of tests to figure out what type of cancer I had. So they did an ultrasound, they did blood work, they were doing, I couldn't even tell you all of them. I was so, obviously for myself, I was in so much shock and just kind of like not really knowing what was going on. But
Right.
all of a sudden, like, after a day or so, they came to me and they told me, they're like, you have the highest stage of testicular cancer, which is stage 3C. Now, a lot of people say they have stage 4 cancer, but I've asked my oncologist multiple times, and he
Right.
says there's actually no stage 4, it's just stage 3C. They can call it stage 4, but it's only stage 3C. So whatever. I had the highest stage of testicular cancer,
Okay.
and usually they track your blood marker. So they have what's called your AFP marker, and it's a blood tumor marker, and you want it to be under 5, I believe, to pretty much be considered okay and healthy. And mine was over 65,000. To put that in perspective, it was so high it was off the charts. So um you know with this that there's a lot of story of resilience in there.
Yeah.
When I was first diagnosed, I remember looking at my parents, because it was just my parents at the time. So Lauren didn't know, nobody knew. It was just
Right.
me and my parents in that
Right.
room. And I remember looking at them, and they're crying. And for me, I think the only thing, and this was, I'm very faith based, I'm Christian, so I'll
Yeah.
share my story as a Christian, to each their own on their
Yeah.
faith. But I really think God put this strength in me the second that I heard that news. And for some reason, I told myself, I'm going to be strong for my parents, for Lauren, when she hears this news, for my friends and family. And I started looking at life as everything is happening for me, not to me. I'm going to say that
Mm.
one more time. Everything in life is happening for me, not to me. And what I mean by that is, if you start looking at life as everything is happening to me, you start making excuses. You start blaming other people. You start letting cancer define you. But when you start saying, how is this happening for me? Then you can learn from it. Then you can grow from it and say, hey, listen, this is unfair. This is unexpected. But guess what? I am dictating my happiness throughout this journey, or my mental strength, my emotional strength.
Right.
And I said, I'm going to use this as a lesson and grow through this experience. And yes, I will have ups and downs. So I really had
Love
that
that.
mindset, and,
Yeah.
and that was kind of it. So,
It sounds like, because in so many ways, when you get hit with something like a cancer diagnosis, right? It feels like you've been completely kicked out of the driver's seat. Like, my body's doing all these things. I didn't choose this. I have no control. But the way you're describing how you mentally and emotionally and spiritually took this on was putting yourself in some way back into that driver's seat of your life. And that's so powerful. Um, I love it. We're going to deep dive into that even more. I do want to ask, so for people who haven't undergone an ultrasound, for instance, I mean, and in that moment, first of all, you heard cancer first. You didn't know specifically what.
No
At the,
idea.
at the time, was Lauren with you or your parents were with you?
Just my parents.
Okay.
So
Okay.
all my emotions came out when I saw Lauren. So
Mhm.
if it's okay, I'd love to talk about that side really quick for
Sure.
people who
Sure.
are, especially men, but also women too. Some women are much better at this than men. I'm going to give you guys a lot of credit here. Is being willing to express what you're going through. And I said, I'm going to be strong for my parents. I'm going to be strong for Lauren. I'm going to be strong for my family. And I was strong. But at a point, once I got rushed to the Cleveland Clinic is when all my friends and family started flooding in. Then all of a sudden I see Lauren, and I was so nervous because I didn't know if she still wanted to be with me, because she was only dating me for 2.5, 3 months at that point. And to put that burden on her was like, I understood it if she didn't want to be around. But not only was she like, I'm going to be around, but she was going to be there every step of the way. And I just remember hugging and then letting all of my emotions out. It was like all this baggage that was on my shoulders, I was able to release. And I want to talk mostly to the men out there. It is okay to express what you're going through, to share your vulnerability, to share your emotions. That is what allows us to relieve the anxiety, relieve the depression, to relieve the stress in our lives by expressing our emotions to people we know, like, and trust and love in our life. And that's what I needed to do. So it was a big push, and it really made a difference moving forward.
That's so wonderful that you address that, because we do hear that, right? Like, not to gender it to your point, but yes, maybe in particular for men, it's hard to sometimes let that part of it go.
Mhm.
And it is part of healing, and processing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
So you actually addressed a lot of what I usually ask, which is, how you process it, the diagnosis, and then how did you break the news? In terms of, I know it was your parents were already there. Um, Lauren, did you tell her on the phone? I mean, how did you, when you were dealing with this yourself, how were you thinking, how am I going to let the other people in my life know about
My
this?
parents had already started, so my parents got in contact with her, so she knew by the time she saw me. um, for me, the only person I actually called was my best friend, Anthony. My parents had already called Lauren, so she had already knew, and I was just waiting for her to come and see her. I ended up calling my best friend, and that was really tough. And hearing him cry, I was still in shock, so I wasn't exactly crying, but I was like that. So it was really just phone tagging people left, right, left, right. And literally, like, this is what happened. There was no rooms available at the Cleveland Clinic at the time, so they had to bring me into an ICU room. And you're only allowed to have like two or three visitors, but at that time, they knew what I was going through, and we had like, they had curtains around and stuff, so we had like 15 people come in, and it was all
Um,
my friends and family, and people would just flood in back and forth
right.
once I got to the clinic. So it really helped having such incredible people into my life.
The support aspect is huge, and we'll dive into that in that third segment today. But do you have any guidance for people? Because it's like, you get hit with a diagnosis, you're dealing with a lot. People handle it in different ways. Some people are like, okay, I'm gonna delegate breaking of the news to my parents or my spouse or my partner or girlfriend. Others are, I'm not going to tell anyone right now. I'm just going to take this time. Do you have any guidance for people?
Yeah. For me, I need the support. I'm not gonna lie. When it comes down to going through challenging moments in my life, the one thing I realize is I cannot fight these battles alone. And this is just me here. I understand some people don't want to overwhelm other people in their lives. But in my opinion, by not telling them and then them figuring it out, and knowing that you've known for a longer period of time, it's going to make it even worse for them. That's my opinion here. So like for me, I think that, you know what, to tell the world, just tell the people you really, love and care about at first.
Mhm.
And when you feel comfortable opening up more, go for it. But for me, I needed
Yeah.
to, my parents were there with my parents, between my parents, my Lauren, or between my parents, Lauren, and my best friends and family. I needed that in my life. So I think it's so important, because at the end of the day, these battles fought alone is not only just lonely, but it's almost impossible to get through.
Very hard. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And now I'm going to shift a little bit as we wrap up this part into just the tests that you had undergone. You'd mentioned an ultrasound and blood work as some, and I know you were in shock for a lot of this, but for people who haven't undergone any of these tests, could you sort of just describe what it was like to go through the ultrasound, what you remember
Mhm.
of it, as well as blood work, and just sort of getting through this testing phase, which can be really nerve wracking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if you want me also to go into, I also had to do a sperm bank as well. So if you want me to talk about that, I can. Up to you. That was a big part because of testicular cancer and with, potentially children moving forward too. So that was
Yes,
another thing that they made me do as well.
absolutely. It's a huge part, the fertility preservation. Yeah,
Yeah.
please go in. That would
Okay.
be great.
Awesome. So I'll start with the ultrasound though. So the ultrasound is it's no different than, if in my opinion, I don't really know because I'm not a woman, but I think it's very similar to a woman. Just, they put gel in you, they go across your stomach. It's for a good hour though that they're doing this with me because they need to check a bunch of different areas. I'm not exactly sure. I wish I could tell you more, but obviously I'm not a nurse or a doctor. But I know it had to do with figuring out where certain things were forming and how they were forming. So they did it on my stomach. They also did it on the testicles, things like that, to make sure where the cancer was forming, how it was forming, and like any irregular things going on in my body. So that was the ultrasound. The blood work had a lot to do with making sure it wasn't like, any type of blood related cancer. But then, as I told you, my AFP markers is blood work as well. So they had to do blood work to figure out where they did the blood mark tumors was to do a bunch of different tests, but then eventually they found out my AFP was crazy high and that's related to testicular cancer. So they gave them another avenue of like, hey, this is what it is. So that was a blood tumor and blood draw that they did for me. And then lastly, with the sperm bank, they knew right away, like as soon as they found out I had testicular cancer, they're like, you need to immediately, because with the surgeries and stuff, there's more than a 50% chance that once you get the surgery done, you potentially cannot have kids again, at least in the natural way. So I ended up going through 2 rounds of that where, I mean, it's awkward obviously, but like, you get it done. And I think it's so important. If, it can get expensive, but you got to look at it this way. If you're looking to have kids and you want to have a future with your own genes and genetics, like do it.
Right.
Like,
You got to take that
I mean,
step.
it's a tough decision, but as weird as it was, I was only dating for Lauren for 3 months, but they wanted us to have this conversation with each other. And I was like, okay, I guess we're going to have this then. So,
Yeah.
me and her had the conversation and, we're like, we absolutely need to be doing this. We weren't ever thinking about kids at that time. Now we are, of course, but,
So
I don't know if
yeah,
I'm breaking up here.
yeah, well, a little bit. No, we're fine, I think. I did want to ask you though, because people will often say like, "Well, where do I go? Like, how do I find my sperm bank?" Was it just a matter of like going online and being like, "Okay, well, here's the one closest to me," and then if you could just walk us through.
Cleveland Clinic did it for me.
Got it.
So they had everything set. I mean, the Cleveland Clinic is like, if you look them up, they're the top two
Yeah.
hospital in the world. So they do everything. So they're just like, hey, listen, we have you here. Do this. We will get you in the right place. And we haven't talked yet, obviously, to the fertility specialists at all yet, but we are soon, most likely. Within the next couple of years, we'll be talking to them and kind of going that direction. So I'm
Right.
not 100% familiar at that point, but yeah, they did it for me. So I don't know all hospitals, but I'm sure big hospitals will
Right.
at least point you in that right direction, or they have it there.
Right, that's true. You can always ask your medical team, and there's
Hmm.
social workers at the hospital, these kinds of people for resources like that. Any last thing you want to talk about with the sperm banking? I mean, it was you froze your sperm separately, right? And
Yep.
you talked about the cost, which I think. Do you remember ballpark? Like, like insurance doesn't cover
I,
this, right?
I was very lucky because my parents basically were like, hey, listen, we got this part under control. So I don't know the exact cost, but I do know it's, probably a couple hundred a month just to get it stay to keep it there. And
For it, freeze it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I can't give you an exact number though.
No, no problem. But it's good for people to know, it's really storage costs that you're talking about here.
Exactly.
But it's a non-invasive process, right? It's what people think is going to happen. They just need you to be able to give the sperm and then they take it and they
Yep.
freeze it. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking us through what a crazy ride it's been so far. Stay tuned. We're going to go into the next segment now with Matthew on the chemotherapy and the surgery.